One of the greatest threats in a grid-down situation is the abuse of power by those who we've entrusted to uphold the rule of law. The support of military and law enforcement is typically well received by a population to provide relief and manage the chaos after a disaster happens. However, if there is a disaster that is regional or national or international in scope, the misuse of authority is inevitable, as supported by countless historical examples. Today we're going to talk about the people who are typically widely received as heroes after disaster, but they can quickly become the villains. And the people I'm talking about are military and law enforcement. So let's get to it.
Why would game show contestants be willing to give each other painful and potentially deadly electric shocks? Well, they say the power of television made them do it. The whole thing was part of an experiment shown in a French documentary called The Game of Death.
The penalty for a wrong answer is you get to pull the lever and shock another contestant, apparently within an inch of their lives. I want to leave, he screams. The contestant doesn't know it, but the victim is just an actor. There is no electric shock.
It's called The Game of Death, a French game show that's part of a documentary on French TV to expose what the show's creators call, quote, TV's mind-numbing power to suspend morality and the striking human willingness to obey orders. Now, even though the players appear to be writhing in pain, audience members cheer them on, shouting for more punishment. Some players were reluctant, but most eventually give in. In fact, just 16 out of the 80 back down. The rest are swayed by the audience and the show's host.
Right here, and pull yourself right up to the counter, please. Steve, you may look on if you'd like while we get set up in here. Would you roll up your right sleeve, please?
Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My eyes bother me.
Go on.
Let me out.
Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich boy.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music. Answer, please. Wrong. 195 volts. Dance.
Let me out of here.
Why did you stop anyway?
I did stop, but he kept going, keep going.
Well, why didn't you just disregard what he said?
He says it's got to go on, the experiment.
Okay. I'd like to tell you a little about the experiment.
The producers say it proves that people are willing to act against their own morals, their own principles, when they're ordered to do something extreme by a source that they trust is legitimate. In this case, the audience, and of course the show's very glamorous host.
There have been countless psychology experiments that have been conducted in the last 50 years that demonstrate that people will comply with orders even if those orders are unjustified, unconstitutional, and runs counter to the individual's ethical code. This may well be one of the greatest threats in the wake of a catastrophic crisis event. It's a haunting fact to know that almost everybody you meet throughout the day, that if they were desperate enough or under the gun of a person in authority, that they would be capable of committing atrocious acts of violence. Each and every one of us somewhere in our evolutionary tree has likely had thousands of predecessors who, for whatever circumstances dictated, took the life of other human beings. The police and military are human beings too, and if society collapses, they'll be thrown in the mix like everybody else. Some of them may leverage their training and whatever intelligence they have of the situation at hand for their own personal gain. And in the dog-eat-dog melee of a post-collapse world, you can't really blame them for utilizing their skills as such. If all hope is lost, it can be expected that things will go this way. But so long as there is a functioning chain of command, it's likely that many won't exploit their badges or uniforms in this way to deceive people into thinking that they're going to help them, only to loot, rob, confiscate, and steal their stuff. It's very likely that many will simply go AWOL to be with their families when they get the sense that things are not going to be coming back together for a long time. But what about what happens during and after the martial law phase? I've done a video before about the phases of SHTF, and martial law will most definitely be imposed in the wake of a disaster scenario in which the rule of law cannot be enforced. This is going to be a natural reaction of the authorities to try to get a hold of the situation. Whether or not this martial imposition is going to be upheld depends on the severity and scope of the event. If the government fragments and the chain of command is sufficiently compromised, the military and police who hadn't already gone AWOL to take care of their families may go rogue. The military may fragment and splinter off into different autonomous entities. Martial law is usually given a bad rap, but it's important to note that most people, when they see the rioting in the streets, when they see things collapsing around them, the uniform is going to be welcomed by most. Most people, even the libertarian types that fear a state of martial law, when they get into the thick of things in an SHTF scenario, an organized military convoy passing through town may be met with sighs of relief. But the real threat starts to emerge in a protracted martial law situation in which the government essentially becomes a military dictatorship, where all constitutional rights and liberties are suspended under the guise of utilitarian purposes. The real threat then comes with soldiers who are just taking orders. The individuals that we've entrusted with the responsibility to maintain law and order in these situations have historically been the ones who have been in greatest violation of human rights and freedoms. The Stanley Milgram experiment that you've seen at the beginning of this video, and subsequent experiments of that sort, have all demonstrated how people can be coaxed into complying with orders which run counter to their conscience, especially if they know that they will not be held directly accountable, or if they feel that they are going to be punished in some way, shape, or form. Social approval is also a powerful motivating factor, as demonstrated in the game show example. The thing that people miss about the Milgram experiment is that that was just a man with a clipboard and a white coat telling a participant to electrocute somebody. They had absolutely no authority or power over this individual whatsoever. The individual could have taken their money, which was $450. In today's dollars, that would be $2,500, which was a significant amount of money for anybody, and they could have walked without any recourse whatsoever. So why then did 65% of participants follow through with the experimenter's orders to the point of hypothetically killing somebody just because they knew they wouldn't be accountable and due to the social pressure of the situation? Now, replace that experimenter with a military official and replace the lab with a crisis zone. Imagine the manner of hell that could be unleashed in a context like that. Well, I don't think we really need to imagine, we just need to look at history to see the results of that. But there's something even more ominous about the results of these studies, and that is that our culture has changed. We've become very desensitized to violence. Ask yourself, how many virtual lives have you taken? Or how many lives have you seen taken on television, be they fake or real? Although the sensory perception of casualties and death is something we've been exposed to throughout our entire evolution, but in nowhere near the amounts as we have in the modern day. It is said that by the age of just 18, our minds are exposed to 200,000 violent acts. Now you can probably triple or quadruple that. That number probably goes up exponentially as we age because we're privy to watching more adult type programming. Hundreds of years ago and beyond to 10,000 years, you were lucky if you even seen 500 people in your life. Never mind seeing the slaughter of 200,000. That has an effect on our psyches. So when the Stanley Milgram experiment was done, that was done in 1974. That was at a time when you had a handful of television networks and the whole action film genre was only starting to take off. Unfortunately, nowadays, you could never conduct studies like that, at least not in North America, and at least not outside of closed doors. I'm quite certain that any military would see the value in taking Milgram's research underground and continuing to learn more about human obedience and compliance to orders that defy their own morality. But this hypothesis is actually supported by the outcomes of the French TV show experiment, The Game of Death, where a person was to administer electric shocks to a fake person and was being cheered on by the crowd to do so. So in some ways, this is actually a combination of a Stanley Milgram experiment and another experiment done by Solomon Asch, who demonstrated the powers of conformity. So when you combine extreme social pressure with authority, you get near 80% compliance to electrocute somebody, essentially to the point of their death. The mob-like scenes in that TV show must have been a lot like the Roman Colosseum, where, people were being cheered on to do things by the crowd. But I also think that much of the compliance that we've seen on that TV program can be attributed to the fact that we are being systematically desensitized to these type of atrocious acts. I heard it once said by a farmer who partook in free-range farming, and he was explaining the reason why he didn't support factory farming. And he said that if we treat animals in that way, like we treat factory farm animals, how is that going to carry over into our dealings with human beings? So this is why I feel that the implications of the Milgram experiment would be far more severe today than they were in days gone by. And that French show is indicative of that. It simulated the adrenaline-inducing experience of a crisis scenario. And the pressure from the crowd and the TV show host better simulated the pressure they would be under if they were in a military organization. It's my belief that all patriotic idealism aside, that the overwhelming majority of people are going to comply with any orders they are given out of fear of punishment and out of fear of social approval. In the military, that would come in the form of your cohorts. It would take monumental ethical fortitude for just one individual to resist orders in a dire situation like that. It's highly unlikely that enough people are going to refuse orders to thwart the execution of such unjustified acts. So some examples of abuses of power might be situations in which you have a pandemic scenario and certain people need to be quarantined into a certain area. You can only imagine what lengths they might go to try to contain something like that. And some people would argue that that's a legitimate cause for martial law and it's to protect the greater good. However, you may also be condemning a lot of healthy people to death. How will prisoners be taken care of in these circumstances? How will prisoners of war be taken care of in these situations like they have in the past? There was a prison during the Civil War called Andersonville Prison. This field prison basically was a makeshift field prison with stockades, 2 levels of stockades, which are basically just tall wooden log walls, which are meant to keep the prisoners in. And it was erected to hold approximately 10,000 people. Now, one of the highest estimates, they say at its peak it held up to 40,000 prisoners in an area which was the size of a few football fields. Now imagine that within the stockade, there's a line that goes all the way around the wall, about 6 feet from the wall. And there was lookout towers around the facility every 50 feet or so. So if a prisoner crossed that line, they were shot. And these prisoners, lots of them died from disease, starvation, gang violence was pretty rapid, just like a normal prison, only no resources. And it was outside. The Japanese committed countless atrocities against the Chinese in World War II. Obviously, what happened in Nazi Germany goes without saying. The occupation of Germany by the Russians, in which 2 million women were sexually violated. In almost every conflict, you will find people who are just following orders, who are doing things that in normal times would get them sent to jail. Imagine even a regional disaster where authorities are going house to house to try to evacuate an area, like the scenes that we've seen on television during the Hurricane Katrina event, where these SWAT teams, these guys who didn't even look like they were dressed like police, were going door to door, kicking in people's doors, guns drawn, to go and confiscate firearms and systematically remove everybody from the city. Completely unconstitutional and possibly even illegal. I'm not sure of the legality of that, but that's just another instance of how power can be abused and people just taking orders. And it's important to remember that these guys who just take orders on their own in their everyday lives, they're probably just normal people like you and me. But in one of these situations, they're obviously in a privileged position in which they have the potential to cause a lot of damage. Now, there's going to be a lot of people out there who make big claims saying that they're going to defy these unconstitutional orders that are given to them. And there may be some small pockets of resistance, and that's demonstrated in the research also, where you have several individuals who collectively are against whatever orders they've been given, but that's going to be very rare. Most people, when it comes down to the wire, especially in a situation like that, they're going to rationalize their compliance with unconstitutional or inhumane orders. Imagine a post-war or post-grid down environment in which resources need to be forcefully reallocated and manpower needs to be conscripted or drafted. This is when you get forced labor situations. Now, in the initial phases, you may be coaxed into going to provide labor for the promise of 3 square meals a day and shelter. But when those resources start to dwindle and you find yourself surrounded by many armed guards and they're asking you to continue working even though you didn't eat that day, well, that's what historically was known as a gulag, one of the leading causes of death during and after World War II. It's very likely that any constitution or charter of rights and freedoms is going to be completely thrown out the window without any recourse until long after the smoke is cleared and you get some tribunals that can retroactively apply some justice, if any. If the power comes back on, that is. You may find yourself in a situation where the authorities are in total control of the resources and the rationing of supplies. And they might see that certain areas of the country don't get those supplies. We also seen that during the 1930s with the Ukrainian Famine, where Stalin basically starved a better part of the Ukraine to the point where many were resorting to cannibalism, even though there was said to be grain trucks which the military denied giving to the people because they were just following orders. It may be that you are even prevented from partaking in your own self-sustaining lifestyle in order to maintain some kind of control over the situation, and that you are actually extracted from a place where you could build a self-sustaining lifestyle and thrown into some kind of camp of sorts. Now, this sounds like post-apocalyptic dystopian science fiction, but this has happened all throughout history, and it doesn't take much once the wheels start turning for it to quickly devolve into a situation like that. So one of the number one threats in a grid down situation is going to be the people who are just taking orders. Now, this is not to say that police or military personnel are inherently any worse as human beings than anybody else. Anybody who partook in one of these experiments, civilian or otherwise, would be likely to make the same ethical concessions in a situation where they felt pressured by authority. So the moral of the story is, yes, you should have a contingency plan for anarchy and social unrest, but you should never put blind faith in authority. It's under those types of circumstances when some of the greatest atrocities ever perpetuated upon mankind were committed. And the longer the lights are out, the more suspicious you should be of the goals and methods of those you've entrusted to watch over you. Let me know your thoughts on this matter in the comments section. Thanks for watching Canadian Prepper Out. The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugoutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.